Fisher & Paykel exists in a cutting-edge industry where innovation is essential to long-term growth and revenue. While you currently occupy a comfortable position, you must remain proactive and forward-thinking. Fisher & Paykel must accomplish three things. Firstly, it must expand its market by raising awareness. Secondly, it must reach this market by providing prominent and visible products. Finally, it must sell to this market by improving value for patients. Fisher & Paykel's offering breaks down into two key areas. The first is respiratory acute care, for which you provide patient interfaces. RAC sales are made primarily through group purchasing organizations, which increase the buying power of hospitals and reduce your selling power. As such, favorable contracts need to be secured with GPOs. The second area is obstructive sleep apnea. Sleep apnea treatment is driven primarily by self-diagnosis, and a vast majority of cases go undiagnosed. As such, it is important to consider not only the intermediaries between the patient and the market, but also the diagnosis of the disease in order to come up with a strategy. While you currently have a dominant position in the RAC market, there is enormous potential for growth in OSA. Rising obesity levels and pollution levels have aggravated the disease, and consumers are more willing to spend money on its treatment. We recognize that Fisher & Paykel has a 4-point strategy which underpins everything it does. These 4 points have formed the basis for all of our recommendations for you here today.
Our strategies today fall into two distinct areas. The first being concerned with driving growth and exposure for our OSA products, and the second being about establishing ourselves as the leader in emerging markets. As Michael's already told you, under this first strategy, there's an organic limit which exists on the size of the market for sleep apnea products that is determined by the number of people that actually realise they're a sufferer of sleep apnea and come forward to receive a diagnosis and treatment. Because sleep apnea is not something which is widely talked about, the effects of sleep apnea are often attributed to a wide variety of other causes. Up to 75% of each cases every single year go undiagnosed and untreated. The issue here then is clearly one of a lack of awareness, and in order to resolve this issue, we propose to establish the Fisher & Paykel Healthcare Sleep Apnea Awareness Foundation. The purpose of this foundation is twofold. Firstly, to drive discourse around the issue of sleep apnea and to help those that suffer realise that they're suffering and to come forward and receive treatment. But secondly, and perhaps most importantly, to ensure that the Fisher & Paykel brand becomes synonymous with sleep apnea prevention. What this means is down the road, when someone comes to choose between Fisher & Paykel's product offering and a competitor's, they're far more likely to choose ours. The second half of this strategy is concerned with tapping into two relatively untouched demographics at present, the elderly and the youth. In respect to the elderly, these are individuals which are often the most afflicted by sleep apnea, given the massive strain that it can put on their already fairly weak hearts. However, given the massive barrier to entry of actually attending a sleep lab to receive a diagnosis, the number of confirmed cases that receive treatment are ridiculously low. With respect and consideration for children, sleep apnea is not something which is often associated as a disease which affects them, despite the fact that it actually affects around 8% of children worldwide in our markets. Our response to this is to provide a tailored value offering to both of these groups, which surpasses the generic offering which all other competitors in the market currently provide them. The second strategy is concerned with establishing ourselves as the leader of emerging markets. The fundamental underpinning of emerging markets is that you have a booming middle class, and that middle class will eventually require healthcare. Fisher & Paykel needs to be the provider of that healthcare. To exemplify the size of this opportunity, let's look at China. Over the past decade, obesity in China has risen over 200%, which when combined with the massive amounts of pollution you observe in the central city areas, results in around 70% of the individuals in these cities suffering from some form of sleep apnea. This corresponds to a market size of around $40 million, and given an increase in consumer willingness in these areas to spend on medical treatment, it means that there is a massive opportunity for Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Our strategy to capitalise this opportunity is to have a specific sales strategy for China as opposed to relying on the current dealership model on which we currently rely.
So having established the strategic direction we want to take, how do we start along that path? The Sleep Apnea Awareness Foundation will understand that in order to communicate information to potential sufferers, we need to have the best possible insights. So gathering the best possible researchers in the world, ensuring that their research isn't overlapping, and that they do have the opportunity to bounce ideas off each other in person is the first step to doing this. But then more importantly, communicating that information is a priority of the foundation. This of course occurs through things like social media and other forms of media, but also importantly, the tone has to be right. And that tone needs to be one that human beings like you and I can engage in, rather than overly scientific or overly medical. Finally, the Sleep Apnea Awareness Foundation will understand the importance of smartphone applications in increasing self-diagnosis. So partnering with existing health applications such as Sleep Cycle or Apple's built-in health app will ensure that we can have alerts which increase the amount of people who go and get diagnosed. But then also having our own consumer-facing apps will mean that once that self-diagnosis does occur, we're more likely to capture that particular customer within the market. How we expand our offering, how we expand our capturing of the elderly market occurs primarily through the mechanism of retirement homes and retirement villages and seminars held within them. These seminars will likely have a high rate of uptake for the reason that people in these communities often have large amounts of free time. And from those seminars, people who think they may be afflicted can then schedule consultations. And then finally, we'll bring the sleep lab to them, rather than trying to convince each individual elderly person to go to a rather cold and foreign sleep lab off-site. The way we target the youth market is relatively similar, but of course occurs through schools rather than retirement villages. It's also important to acknowledge that the elderly market approach that I just discussed can be even more closely replicated in a university sense, where instead of rest homes, we can target, for example, halls of residence or hostels that people live in while they're at university and capture that part of the youth end of the market. All of this means that OSA receives the awareness it requires in society, but perhaps more importantly, that Fisher & Paykel Healthcare becomes synonymous with prevention as that awareness increases. In terms of how we lead the emerging markets that Ben talked about a few moments ago, this of course occurs through basic things like having a permanent sales office in a country like China, but it also means that that sales office and the sales team that we employ needs to understand the unique nature of these markets, such as having experience in governmental relations, or having experience at the early stages when healthcare systems are sophisticating, which means that we're more likely to develop strong relations with GPOs when they're just initially forming. Finally, in terms of cementing a position in these markets, having the best possible ancillary offerings means we lead these markets right from the start. And while research and development will drive the majority of these offerings, we've thought of one example, which would be customized CPAP masks. I'm sure you would understand that most young children would feel very apprehensive about putting a mask on, like the one on the screen behind me. But if that mask was Darth Vader themed, or themed in the fashion of their favourite cartoon character, perhaps they'd feel more comfortable about that treatment process. And again, finally, allowing users to access their own data, rather than merely being the subjects of it and knowing that just their insurers and their doctors having it, and offering that to them through applications will increase the value and the degree to which you can capture these markets, as well as grow your share of existing ones.
Financially, our two strategies will increase your current valuation of $900 million to over $1.15 billion. I'd like to run you through some of the thought processes in our analysis. So for our first strategy, the main assumption that we made was an EBIT margin of 20.2%, which is approximately equivalent to the 5-year historical average for Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. We conducted a sensitivity analysis based on the percentage of people we sign up through our consultations and seminars. We expect a 50% sign-up rate for those with symptoms of sleep apnea, and we believe a sign-up rate of 50% for those with sleep apnea, and give and take a 15% for pessimistic and optimistic forecast. We believe that with the staggering of the size of your sales team, you can achieve an additional value adding of $81 million from our first strategy. For our second strategy, there are two main things I'd like to discuss with you briefly. The first is the corporate tax rate. In China, the standard tax rate is 25%, but for high-tech healthcare companies like Fisher & Paykel, the Chinese government often allows for tax discounts of 10%, which makes us observe a 15% corporate tax rate, which makes our expansion into China somewhat more favorable in a financial standpoint. Also, a 35% revenue growth rate in the first 2 years might sound somewhat large, but would like to express the idea that when GE Healthcare first moved into the Chinese and Indian markets, they achieved revenue growth rates of 100% for the first 3 to 5 years. And the fact that we've been achieving a CAGR of 10% for the past 5 years makes us believe that this 35% could even be an underestimation of the growth potentials ahead of you. So with similar calculation methods, we believe that our second strategy will add on an additional $176 million, which means that our revenue from the Asia Pacific region will increase from 18 to 26% in the next 5 years.
We hope that you appreciate our analysis and diagnosis of Fisher & Healthcare, and if you implement our strategic recommendations, we guarantee your executives will sleep soundly tonight. Thank you.
Just got a question about your first strategy. You said that you're going to implement a lot of ways people can self-diagnose a lot easier. But what if I've got sleep apnea, but I don't even know the symptoms, I don't even know this term? How do you envision to actually get people?
So what we're talking about when we say self-diagnose is, say for instance you're a very heavy snorer, everyone's commented on it in the past, which is one of the main symptoms of sleep apnea. But because there's no awareness, there's no discussion in society that sleep apnea is even a thing that exists, you don't realise that that's what you're suffering from, and there are actually very real health consequences that are associated with that. So what we're talking about when we say self-diagnosis is through the foundation getting information out there about what the symptoms actually are and how to distinguish between sleep apnea symptoms and just everyday snoring or everyday symptoms that are associated with it. The idea is that through the seminars that we do, through the information out there with campaigns, an individual that otherwise wouldn't realise they had sleep apnea would realise that it could potentially be something they're suffering from. And from that point, they can come to a sleep lab and receive an official diagnosis and then treatment from Fisher & Paykel.
So can you talk to me a little bit more about these apps that you're partnering with the likes of Apple for? How would this diagnosis actually work? What's the customer journey?
Yeah, so I think this also links in with this question a little bit, the first question a little bit. First of all, in terms of the type of information we can use, the consumer-facing apps that we have, we already have all this data, and it's being provided to doctors and insurance companies. And so this data, it only really needs to be displayed in another way. And it basically shows the degree to which the mask is being taken off at night and how effective it's being in basically smoothing out someone's sleep. So if we display that in a consumer-facing application, that one's quite valuable. In terms of how we partner with other apps, so Sleep Cycle currently monitor the degree to which you have an uninterrupted sleep or how much you're moving around and things like that through the accelerometer within smartphones. And Apple's healthcare device doesn't offer that. But essentially the idea is with Sleep Cycle, we use their existing monitoring and when particular trends such as someone moving around a huge amount at night show up, that has an alert which says you may be suffering from sleep apnea, and then encourages them to go and potentially get diagnosed or even just seek out further symptoms. If we were to go down the road of integrating with Apple's healthcare app or health app, we could first build in that function, such as sleep monitoring, but the other thing we could do is have use the microphone feature within the smartphone to monitor how loudly people are snoring, and that would mean that you can start to use another potential symptom to show more people that they may have sleep apnea, and then direct them to getting a diagnosis in a physical sense at their local doctor.
When you looked at what Fisher & Paykel healthcare strategy should be, did you go and read ResMed and Resbiotics and your reports?
Yeah, so we're aware of the ResMed strategy.
Right.
Is there any particular?
Just curious, what's ResMed's strategy versus in this area versus say Fisher & Paykel healthcare?
ResMed do currently have a foundation set up, which is the aim is to raise awareness regarding sleep apnea. I think that the key difference in terms of what we're suggesting Fisher & Paykel does is it seems that most of those efforts are aimed at doctors, so increasing the amount that doctors are aware of sleep apnea as a condition and their ability to diagnose it and their ability to use the existing technology which they offer. The difference in the strategy that we're suggesting is that it's far more patient-facing and focused on patients having that initial feeling that they need to go and get a diagnosis from their doctor, and basically starting that customer acquisition process much earlier on.
David?
Tom, you talk about the youth demographic having a problem. 8% of them have got OSA, obstructive sleep apnea. How bad a problem is it for them? Do you know?
Absolutely. So in a purely medical sense, the effects of sleep apnea in terms of straining their heart, which can have sort of long-term consequences for them longer down the road, exists for a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old the same way that it exists for anyone of any other age. Although they won't be seeing the effects of that immediately, given the fact that they're very young, very fit, very healthy in many cases, particularly in New Zealand, doesn't mean that those things won't affect them negatively down the road. Perhaps another sort of element of harm that exists only within children is the fact that when you have sleep apnea, a good night's sleep is incredibly hard to come by. So when you have a sufferer of sleep apnea for their entire time from years 1 through to year 13, having poor night's sleep, having an inability to focus throughout class, means that not only is their concentration sort of inhibited throughout class during the day, means that they're very sort of unable or limited in their ability to learn, to take on new information, and that can have almost far worse effects than the health implications of sleep apnea alone when it comes to sort of being able to self-develop and being able to get sort of quality jobs later down the road. So we think that although the immediate health effects aren't visible within children until 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we think the effect that it has on their concentration and their inability to sort of succeed in school is something that's particularly important and needs to be addressed.
Is it that the estimated market in this was 50% of people who aren't aware? What would be the cost to bring this awareness about?
What could we do?
What would be the cost?
Cost of implementing our strategy.
Yeah.
What we estimated was that the cost would also be taken into consideration based on the EBIT margin that we use, so the 20.2%. So 20.2% would take into consideration like the overhead expenses that would be required to run a strategy like this. But we also included a capital expenditure of $2 million for every time we increase our sales team. So this $2 million would take into consideration maybe like the equipment and the facilities needed for the sleep labs, and also maybe like building requirements that we might need. So,
Okay.
Just to add on to that, there is a cost which is not so much financial, and that by raising awareness of sleep apnea, there might be a degree to which we enhance our competitors' business. Have we considered that in the process of our strategy? And we thought that the fact that it is the Fish and Paykel Healthcare Foundation, there is a link and sort of, in a way, a first mover advantage in terms of the informational aspect of the campaign, which would mean we would be able to secure proportionally more people for treatment than our competitors through initiatives.
I noticed that perhaps you're referring more to the raising awareness element of that first strategy, so setting up the foundation, getting the information out there. So all of those costs were included in that initial $2 million capex, which is accounted for in the cost of that financing side.
So with so many people who are undiagnosed around the world, is there any reason why I should be focusing on the emerging markets? Because it seems like it's quite a large cost and quite a large effort when I've got traditional markets that I can target a lot easier.
I think that's an understandable concern, and that's to some extent why this presents such a large opportunity. The reason being, most companies probably are thinking that way, and that's why the sort of degree to which these markets have so far been penetrated is quite low, because no company, ResMed, Fish and Paykel Healthcare, haven't particularly targeted these markets for the reasons that you suggest. I think what offers particular opportunities in these markets is firstly that the healthcare market's still sophisticated, so that people are still becoming sophisticated. So what that means is where in the US it's very hard to get new GPOs to take on your company as their provider in this area. In an emerging market, those relationships haven't been built to a great extent. In some cases, the GPOs are only just forming. And so the opportunity to capitalize on that formation process and be there right from the start, I think means that if you're sort of weighing up, do we prioritize one developed market or one emerging market, that's why we'd suggest choosing Platinum.
What do you think ResMed and Respironics will do if Fish and Paykel Healthcare starts increasing their market share in their main markets? What do you think their competitive response will be?
I think one response might be to try and embark on similar informational campaigns. the reason why I think that our strategy will be more effective, and while that obviously I'm not going to claim that won't have any impact on the degree to which we can be successful, I think ours will be more successful because it appears as though it's a strategy taken out of genuine concern for the lack of diagnosis, whereas if we set up a foundation doing this and then they start doing pretty much the exact same thing, it looks cynical, it looks like it's a self-interested decision rather than one out of...
You don't think they'd come after my rack market?
I think it's possible, but again, as we mentioned in the slides, the rack market is largely based on GPOs, and at the point that we already have those relationships, of course some work would have to be done to maintain them, but we have the position already cemented in that market, and I think it would be harder for them to take that than for us to take their market in the OSA sector.
Adding on to the issue of RACs, because these are oftentimes...
I'm going to have to stop you there.
Well done, guys.